Picture this: a small village in the Austrian Alps. December 5th, 1923. The snow falls thick and silent, blanketing the narrow cobblestone streets in white. It is the kind of cold that burns your lungs, that makes your breath hang in frozen clouds before your face. The sun set hours ago, and now the only light comes from oil lamps flickering in cottage windows, casting long shadows across the snow. You are a child in this village, perhaps 7 or 8 years old. All day, your mother has been warning you to behave, to be good, to remember what night this is. But you did not listen. You were rude to your sister. You stole a piece of bread from the kitchen. You lied about finishing your chores. And now, as darkness settles over the mountains like a burial shroud, you hear something that makes your blood turn to ice. Bells, not the cheerful jingle of sleigh bells you might expect. These are heavy, discordant, clanging like the chains of a prisoner. They echo through the narrow streets, growing louder with each passing moment. Your mother's face goes pale. She crosses herself and mutters a prayer. Through the frosted window, you see other families doing the same, pulling their children close, extinguishing their lamps. This is not a story about Santa Claus bringing presents to good little boys and girls. This is not the sanitized, commercialized version of Christmas that fills shopping malls and greeting cards. This is the old story, the real story. The one that comes from the frozen peaks of Central Europe, where winter is not a season, but a test of survival. This is about the creature that walks beside St. Nicholas on his annual journey. The beast with horns and fur and chains. The demon with a basket on his back, empty and waiting. You know his name, even if you have never spoken it aloud. Krampus. Before we descend into the darkness of this ancient tradition, I want to ask something of you. If you believe these forgotten truths, these old world terrors that shaped entire cultures, deserve to be remembered, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Your support keeps the candle burning in the darkness, allows us to continue exploring the shadows that history has tried to hide. Because this story, like so many others we will tell, is one that institutions would prefer you forget. Tonight, we will travel back to the snowbound villages of Austria and Bavaria, to a time when Christmas was not yet a holiday of consumerism and comfort. We will trace the origins of Krampus from pagan ritual to Catholic persecution to modern revival. We will walk through the streets during Krampusnacht, when men become monsters and terror becomes tradition. And we will examine the question no one wants to answer. What happened to the children who disappeared on those December nights? The ones whose names appear in old records with the notation "gone, no body found"? Welcome to the world where Christmas has teeth. The Alpine regions of Austria, Bavaria, and northern Italy are places where winter arrives early and stays late. In the villages that cling to mountainsides like barnacles to a ship, the darkness of December is profound and absolute. Before electricity, before modern heating, before the comforts that insulate us from cruelty, winter in these places was a time of genuine fear. Food was scarce, firewood was precious, and the nights, those endless nights, were filled with sounds that could not be explained. In this environment, St. Nicholas was not yet the jolly fat man in a red suit. He was St. Nicholas, a stern bishop who traveled on December 6th to reward the obedient and mark the wicked. But even a saint, the people believed, could not travel alone through such darkness. He needed protection. He needed someone to handle the unpleasant business of punishment while he distributed his rewards. He needed a companion who was not bound by Christian mercy. Enter Krampus, half goat, half demon, all nightmare. His name comes from the old High German word Krampen, meaning claw. Medieval woodcuts show him as a towering figure covered in dark fur, with curved horns sprouting from his skull, a long serpentine tongue lolling from his fanged mouth. He carries chains that he rattles to announce his presence. He wields birch branches, ruten, to beat disobedient children. And on his back, he carries a Wadenkorb, a large wicker basket or sack. That basket is crucial to understanding the terror Krampus inspired. It was not merely symbolic. According to the tradition, truly wicked children would not receive a beating and be sent home chastened. No, Krampus would seize them, stuff them into his basket, and carry them away into the frozen night. Some versions of the story say he took them to his lair in the mountains. Others say he took them directly to hell. A few particularly dark variants claim he drowned them in mountain streams or devoured them alive. This was not a metaphor. Parents in these villages genuinely used Krampus as a behavioral tool. If you misbehave, Krampus will take you. The threat was visceral, specific, and supported by the entire community. On the night of December 5th, Krampusnacht, the streets would fill with men dressed as the demon, playing the role with frightening commitment. Children who encountered these Krampus figures would be genuinely terrified, sometimes traumatized. That was the point. But where did this creature come from? Why does he exist at all? To answer that, we must go back further than Christianity, back before the church arrived in these mountains with its saints and its promises of salvation. We must return to the old gods, the ones who demanded blood and respected only strength. Because Krampus, despite what the priests would later claim, was not born from Christian demonology. He is far older than that. He is a remnant, a survivor, a piece of the pagan world that Christianity could suppress but never fully destroy. The ancient Germanic and Alpine peoples worshipped horned gods long before they heard of Christ. Figures like Cernunnos, the Celtic horned god of infertility. The wild huntsman who rode through winter storms collecting the souls of the dead. Krampus shares characteristics with all of them. The horns, the association with winter, the connection to the untamed forces of. When Christianity spread through Europe, it had a choice when encountering these old deities. It could demonize them, transform them into devils and servants of Satan, or it could absorb them, reshape them into something that served the new faith. With Krampus, the church attempted both strategies. First, they tried to erase him, to ban the festivals and burn the masks. When that failed, they attempted to co-opt him, to make him a servant of St. Nicholas, a tool of Christian morality. Neither approach fully worked. The people of the Alps held on to their demon with surprising tenacity. They needed him, not because they were cruel or sadistic, but because in a world where survival was never guaranteed, where children could freeze to death if they wandered from home, where disobedience could mean the difference between life and death for an entire family, fear was a valuable teaching tool. Back in that cottage in 1923, you are still standing at the window, watching the snow fall. The bells are closer now. Your mother has extinguished the lamp. In the darkness, you can make out shapes moving through the village square. Tall figures, wrong somehow. Their proportions not quite human. One of them turns toward your window, and for just a moment, you see its face in the moonlight. the carved wooden mask, the horns, the eyes, black and hollow and hungry. Your mother pulls you away from the window. She whispers that if you promise to be good, truly good, Krampus will pass by your house. But you know, with the certainty that only children possess, that something is watching. Something that knows what you did. Something that carries an empty basket and is looking to fill it. This is where our story begins. Not with presents and cookies and comfort, but with bells in the darkness, with chains dragging through snow, with the knowledge that Christmas, in its oldest form, was never meant to be safe. It was meant to remind us that winter is cruel, that darkness has teeth, and that sometimes the monsters are real. The shadow behind St. Nicholas is waiting, and tonight we will meet him face to face. To understand the monster, you must first understand the world that created him. Long before missionaries climbed the Alpine passes carrying crosses and scriptures, long before the first church bells echoed through mountain valleys, the people who lived in these frozen peaks worshipped very different gods. Gods who did not promise salvation or eternal paradise. Gods who demanded sacrifice and respected only strength. Gods with horns. Close your eyes and travel back with me, not centuries, but millennia. To a time when Rome was still a collection of mud huts on 7 hills, when writing had not yet reached the forests of Germania, when the world north of the Mediterranean was shrouded in what classical historians dismissively called barbarism. The tribes who inhabited the Alpine regions, the ancestors of modern Austrians and Bavarians, lived lives that were brutal, short, and intimately connected to the cycles of. They had no choice. Survival depended on reading the signs of the seasons, appeasing the forces that controlled weather and harvest, and preparing for winter as though preparing for war. Because winter, in that ancient world, was war. It was a siege that lasted months, an enemy that killed indiscriminately, a test that entire communities could fail. When the snows came early and stayed late, when the harvest was poor, when the cold penetrated every shelter and froze the very marrow in your bones, you needed more than hope. You needed power. You needed magic. You needed gods who understood darkness. The horned god was such a deity. We do not know his original name because his people left no written records. But we know he existed because his image survives in artifacts scattered across Europe. Celtic tribes called him Cernunnos, the Horned One, and depicted him sitting cross-legged with antlers branching from his head, surrounded by animals. Germanic peoples had their own versions, gods of the hunt and forest and untamed wilderness. All of them shared certain characteristics: the horns or antlers, the association with fertility and death, the connection to the boundary between civilization and chaos. This was not a gentle god. The horned deities of pre-Christian Europe demanded blood. During the darkest days of winter, around the time we now call the winter solstice, ancient peoples performed rituals designed to ensure the sun's return. They lit massive bonfires on hilltops. They sacrificed animals, and in some cases, humans. They wore animal skins and horned masks, transforming themselves into the god to channel his power. These were not metaphorical performances. They were acts of desperate magic, attempts to survive in a world that offered no guarantees. Archaeologists have found evidence of these practices throughout the Alpine regions. In remote caves, they have discovered ceremonial masks carved from wood and adorned with real goat horns, some dating back over 2,000 years. In peat bogs, they have uncovered the preserved bodies of ritual victims, throats slit, placed in water as offerings to gods whose names we have forgotten. In ancient Germanic texts recorded centuries later by Christian monks, we find references to the wild hunt, a spectral procession of horned spirits that rode through winter storms, collecting souls. The people who practiced these rituals were not evil or insane. They were terrified. Imagine living without electricity, without modern medicine, without any scientific understanding of why winter happened or whether spring would ever return. Imagine watching your children grow thin from hunger, watching elders freeze to death in their sleep, watching entire families succumb to diseases that had no name and no cure. In such a world, the idea that powerful spirits controlled the seasons made perfect sense. And if those spirits had horns and demanded sacrifice, then you gave them what they wanted. The horned god represented the raw power of the aspect of the divine that was neither loving nor cruel, but simply indifferent to human suffering. He was the blizzard that buried villages. He was the wolf pack that stalked livestock. He was the fever that took children in the night. But he was also the fertility that returned in spring, the hunt that provided meat, the strength that allowed survival. To ancient peoples, this duality made him more trustworthy than a god who promised only goodness. Because the world they lived in was not good. It was hard and cold and unforgiving. Their gods needed to reflect that reality. When Christianity arrived in the Alpine regions, beginning in earnest during the 6th and 7th centuries, it encountered these deeply rooted traditions with a mixture of horror and strategic calculation. The missionaries understood that simply declaring the old gods false would not work. These were not abstract theological concepts to the mountain peoples. These were forces they had witnessed, spirits they had felt, entities that had answered their prayers with blood and survival. You could not simply erase that with words. So the church employed a different strategy. It demonized the horned god, literally transforming him into Satan. The association was deliberate and calculated. In Christian iconography, the devil acquired horns, cloven hooves, and a connection to bestial Io, all characteristics of the pagan deities. The message was clear. The gods you worshipped were actually demons. The rituals you performed were devil worship. The masks you wore during winter ceremonies were the faces of hell itself. This transformation was remarkably effective across much of Europe. In regions where centralized political power supported the church, where literacy spread quickly, where urban centers replaced isolated villages, the old gods faded into folklore or disappeared entirely. But the Alpine regions were different. Geography protected them. The mountains were difficult to traverse. Communication was limited, and village communities maintained their independence for centuries after Christianity became the official religion. In these remote places, the old ways survived. They survived because they worked, not in any supernatural sense, but as social technology. The winter rituals, the masked processions, the invocation of the horned god, all of these served practical purposes. They reinforced community bonds. They provided an outlet for fear and aggression. They created shared cultural identity. And most importantly, they gave people a sense of control in a world that offered very little. When the church insisted that villages abandon their Krampus traditions, it was not merely asking them to stop a quaint custom. It was demanding they give up a survival mechanism that had sustained their ancestors for millennia. The people resisted. They found ways to incorporate the horned demon into Christian festivals, placing him alongside St. Nicholas as a servant rather than an independent deity. They claimed the tradition was about teaching children morality, which aligned with Christian values. They made whatever compromises were necessary to keep their demon alive. Because Krampus was not simply a monster from their past. He was a piece of something older and deeper, a thread connecting them to ancestors who had survived impossible odds. He represented the acknowledgement that the world contains darkness, that winter will always come, that suffering and fear are not aberrations, but fundamental aspects of existence. Christianity promised redemption and eternal life. Krampus promised nothing except honesty about the reality. In the mountain villages, grandmothers still taught their grandchildren the old ways. Fathers passed down masks that had been worn by their fathers and grandfathers before them. When December arrived and the nights grew long, when the snow began to fall and the wind howled through the passes, people remembered that once their ancestors had called upon horned gods to survive the darkness. And though they now crossed themselves and attended Mass and prayed to Christian saints, part of them still believed, still remembered, still kept the old covenant. Krampus survived because he had to, because the mountains demanded it, because winter in the Alps is still cruel, still dangerous, still a force that reduces human civilization to fragile lights scattered across a vast darkness. The church could build its cathedrals in the valleys. It could ring its bells and preach its sermons and promise salvation. But when December came, when the bells rang in the darkness and the horned figures walked through the snow, the people remembered what they had always known. Some truths are too old to die. Some gods refuse to be forgotten. And Krampus, born from the frozen peaks before Christianity, before writing, before history itself, was both. The year is 1603. In a candlelit chamber within the Archdiocese of Salzburg, a bishop sits at his desk composing a letter. His hand trembles slightly, not from age but from righteous fury. Outside his window, the Alpine winter presses against the glass like a living thing. He has just received reports from mountain parishes, accounts that fill him with equal parts horror and determination. The people, his flock, are still performing the devil's rituals. They are still donning horned masks. They are still parading through villages on December 5th, terrifying children and glorifying demons. After nearly 1,000 years of Christianity in these mountains, the beast still walks. He dips his quill in ink and begins to write. This time, the decree will carry the weight of ecclesiastical law. This time, there will be consequences: excommunication, denial of sacraments, eternal damnation. Surely, faced with the loss of their immortal souls, the people will abandon this pagan obscenity. Surely they will see reason. He signs the document with a flourish, presses his seal into warm wax, and dispatches it to the mountain parishes. In his mind, this is the beginning of the end for Krampus. He could not have been more wrong. The Church's war against Krampus would last for centuries, consuming the energy of bishops and priests, inspiring papal bulls and local edicts, resulting in burnings and banishments and brutal punishments. And it would fail. Completely, utterly, definitively fail. Because you cannot kill something that people need more than they need salvation. The Church's opposition to Krampus began almost as soon as missionaries encountered the tradition. Early Christian authorities in the Alpine regions recognized immediately what they were seeing: a continuation of pagan devil worship, thinly disguised as a Christmas custom. The horned figure was too obviously derived from pre-Christian deities, too clearly a remnant of the old ways. If Christianity was to truly triumph in these mountains, If the people were to be brought fully into the fold of Christ, Krampus had to be eliminated. The first attempts were subtle. Priests delivered sermons condemning the practice, explaining that the horned demon was not a helpful companion to St. Nicholas, but rather Satan himself, come to claim souls. They taught that participating in Krampus celebrations was a mortal sin, that wearing the masks was an invitation for actual demons to possess you, that watching the processions was tantamount to attending a black mass. Some villagers listened, some abandoned the tradition, at least publicly, but most did not. When persuasion failed, the church escalated to prohibition. Throughout the 16th and 17th centuries, various dioceses issued formal bans on Krampus celebrations. These edicts were remarkably specific, suggesting just how entrenched the tradition had become. They forbade the wearing of devil masks and animal skins. They outlawed the ringing of bells during the processions. They prohibited the use of birch branches for ritual beatings. They even banned the consumption of alcohol during Krampusnacht, recognizing that the festival had become as much about communal drinking as about religious observation. The penalties for violating these bans were severe. In some regions, participants faced public whipping or time in stocks. In others, they were denied access to the sacraments, a punishment that in a deeply Catholic society meant social death. Priests refused to baptize the children of known Krampus participants. They declined to perform marriages or last rites. The message was clear: choose between your demon and your church. The people chose the demon, not because they rejected Christianity, not because they preferred paganism, but because the two had become so thoroughly intertwined in their culture that separating them was impossible. Krampus was not an alternative to Christmas. He was part of Christmas. He walked beside St. Nicholas not as an enemy, but as a complement. The saint rewarded virtue, the demon punished vice. Together, they represented a complete moral system that made sense to people whose lives were shaped by both devotion and fear. In 1525, during the upheaval of the Protestant Reformation, some church authorities saw an opportunity. They blamed Krampus celebrations on the corrupting influence of Protestant ideas, claiming that the tradition had grown more extreme as Catholic authority weakened. This was historically backwards. Krampus predated Protestantism by over 1,000 years. But truth mattered less than strategy. The Counter-Reformation in the Alpine regions included a renewed assault on folk traditions deemed incompatible with Catholic orthodoxy. Priests traveled from village to village, confiscating masks and burning them in public squares. They gathered birch rods and cast them into flames. They poured out barrels of schnapps and broke the ceramic bells used in the processions. In some extreme cases, they dug up the graves of deceased Krampus performers and denied them burial in consecrated ground, declaring them servants of Satan even in death. The campaign was brutal, thorough, and utterly futile. Because for every mask burned, villagers carved 2 more. For every bell confiscated, blacksmiths forged replacements. The tradition went underground when necessary, emerging in full force as soon as authorities looked away. Fathers taught sons in secret how to construct the costumes, how to move like the demon, how to make the children scream with delicious terror. Grandmothers whispered the old stories to grandchildren, stories that had nothing to do with Christianity and everything to do with survival. The church's fundamental miscalculation was assuming that Krampus was merely a superstition, an irrational holdover from a more primitive time. They did not understand that the tradition served practical purposes in these mountain communities. It provided a controlled outlet for aggression and fear. It reinforced social hierarchy and behavioral norms in a way that Sunday sermons never could. It created communal bonds through shared ritual. And perhaps most importantly, it acknowledged the darkness that the church preferred to ignore. Christianity, especially in its medieval and early modern forms, offered a binary worldview. Good versus evil, heaven versus hell, salvation versus damnation. But the people of the Alps lived in a world that was not binary, but spectral, filled with shades of gray and ambiguous forces. Winter could kill you, but it also purified. Wolves were dangerous, but they were also necessary for controlling other animal populations. Even death, while feared, was understood as part of the natural cycle. Krampus represented this complexity in a way that Christian theology could not. By the 18th century, many church authorities had begun to recognize the futility of their crusade. Some adopted a policy of grudging tolerance, allowing the celebrations to continue while insisting that participants attend Mass and maintain their Christian obligations. Others attempted a different strategy: co-optation. If they could not eliminate Krampus, perhaps they could reshape him into something more acceptable. This is when the narrative of Krampus as St. Nicholas's servant became formalized. Church-approved versions of the tradition emphasized that Krampus was not an independent demon, but rather a tool used by the saint to punish wicked children. He had no power of his own, no autonomy, no connection to the old gods. He was simply a scary helper, a means to an end, a way to teach moral lessons. This sanitized version was preached from pulpits and included in approved religious texts. The people nodded along during Mass, then went home and told their children the real stories, the old stories, the ones where Krampus was not a servant, but a force unto himself, where his origins stretched back before Christianity, where his power came not from a saint, but from the mountains themselves. The church could control the official narrative, but it could not control what grandparents whispered in the darkness or what fathers taught while carving masks by firelight. Even papal authority proved insufficient. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, several popes issued statements condemning Krampus celebrations as incompatible with Christian dignity. These pronouncements were read from pulpits across the Alpine regions. They were posted on church doors and published in religious newspapers. They threatened spiritual consequences for continued participation, and they were largely ignored, because by this point, Krampus had become more than a tradition. He had become identity. The church's crusade against Krampus failed because it was fighting against something that served a deeper human need than religious orthodoxy. People needed to acknowledge darkness. They needed to teach their children about consequences in a visceral, unforgettable way. They needed rituals that connected them to their ancestors and to the harsh landscape that shaped their lives. The church offered salvation and eternal life. Krampus offered something more immediate: the acknowledgement that winter is cruel, that suffering exists, that fear is real and must be faced. Today, in the 21st century, the Catholic Church in Austria and Bavaria maintains an uneasy peace with Krampus. Priests still occasionally condemn the more extreme celebrations. They still warn that the tradition should not overshadow the religious meaning of Christmas, but they no longer try to eliminate it. They cannot. The beast has outlasted every attempt to cage or kill him. The lesson is uncomfortable but clear. Sometimes the monsters win, not because they are stronger than God, but because they serve truths that even God cannot erase. The truth that darkness exists, The truth that fear shapes us. The truth that some things are older than faith and deeper than prayer. Krampus survived the church's crusade because he was never really the enemy. He was the shadow Christianity refused to acknowledge, the aspect of human that demands recognition no matter how many times we try to burn it away. Imagine you are standing in the village square of Salzburg, Austria. The date is December 5th, 2024. The temperature hovers just below freezing, your breath forming clouds in the air, your hands buried deep in your coat pockets. Around you, thousands of people pressed together, tourists and locals alike, all waiting for the same thing. The streetlights cast pools of amber light across the cobblestones. Vendors sell mulled wine and roasted chestnuts. Children clutch their parents' hands. Everyone is watching the darkness beyond the square, where the narrow medieval streets twist and disappear into shadow. Then you hear it. The bells, hundreds of them, clanging in chaotic disharmony, growing louder with each passing second. The crowd falls silent. Even the children stop chattering, because everyone knows what comes next. Everyone knows what emerges from that darkness every December 5th, as it has for centuries, as it will for centuries more. This is Krampusnacht, the night of reckoning, and tonight, the demons walk. Modern Krampusnacht celebrations occur in hundreds of towns and villages across Austria, Bavaria, and northern Italy. The largest festivals draw tens of thousands of spectators, transforming quiet Alpine communities into theaters of controlled chaos. But the tradition is not entertainment, not exactly. It is something older and stranger, something that exists in the space between performance and ritual, between play and genuine terror. To understand Krampusnacht, you must experience it. You must stand in that crowd. You must feel the bells vibrating in your chest. You must smell the smoke and sweat and alcohol. You must watch as ordinary men become monsters. The preparation begins weeks in advance. Men who will portray Krampus, called Krampusläufer or Krampus runners, gather in secret. In many villages, these groups form exclusive societies with rules and hierarchies that have existed for generations. Some families have participated for centuries, passing down masks and techniques from father to son. Joining is not automatic. You must be invited, must prove your commitment, must show that you understand what it means to become the demon. The costumes are extraordinary works of dark art. Each Krampus outfit is unique, crafted over months or even years. The base is usually genuine sheepskin or goatskin, still bearing the animal's smell, still retaining something of its essence. The fur must be dark, matted, filthy. A Krampus is not a beautiful creature. He is something that has crawled from the earth, something that reeks of wilderness and decay. The masks are carved from wood, traditionally from linden or pine, then painted and adorned with real horns from Alpine ibex or domestic goats. The best masks are terrifying not because they are grotesque, but because they seem almost alive. The eyes are hollow black voids. The mouths hang open, revealing fangs carved from bone or fashioned from metal. Some masks include mechanical elements, jaws that move, tongues that loll. The carvers, many of whom learned their craft from masters who learned from masters before them, understand that a Krampus mask must do more than frighten. It must transform. The runners also wear massive cowbells, some weighing over 20 pounds, strapped to their backs or waists with leather harnesses. These bells, called glocken, produce that distinctive discordant clanging that announces the Krampus approach. They are so heavy that running while wearing them is physically exhausting, a test of endurance as much as performance. The sound they make is not musical. It is percussive, primal, a noise that triggers something deep in the human nervous system. In their hands, the runners carry birch branches bundled into switches called rooten. These are not props. They are weapons, used to strike at spectators who get too close or at designated targets during the procession. The branches leave welts. They sting, they hurt. This is intentional. A Krampus who does not inflict some level of real discomfort is not doing his job properly. As night falls on December 5th, the runners gather in staging areas away from public view. This is when the transformation begins. They drink, sometimes heavily, loosening inhibitions and building courage. They help each other into the heavy costumes, adjusting straps, securing masks, testing the weight of their bells. They speak little, if at all. Language belongs to the human world. What they are becoming does not speak. When the mask goes on, something changes. Every runner who has participated for years will tell you this. The mask is not just a covering, it is a doorway. Once your face is hidden, once you see the world through those hollow eyes, once you feel the weight of the horns on your head and smell the animal stink of the fur, you are no longer yourself. You are Krampus. Your thoughts slow and simplify. Your movements become aggressive, predatory. You begin to growl, to snarl, to make sounds that come from somewhere deeper than your throat. Psychologists might call this dissociation or temporary identity loss. Anthropologists might describe it as ritual possession. The runners themselves have a simpler explanation. The demon gets inside you. Not literally, not supernaturally, but psychologically. The costume and the tradition and the expectation and the alcohol and the darkness all combine to create a state where your normal inhibitions vanish, where the part of you that is civilized and Christian and rational takes a step back, where something older emerges. The run begins with the bells. The Krampusläufer start moving through the streets, initially at a walk, then faster, building momentum. The sound is overwhelming, a wall of noise that bounces off stone buildings and fills the night air. Spectators hear them coming long before they see them. Children begin to cry. Adults press back against walls. Everyone knows to give the runners space. Then they emerge into the light of the main square, and the crowd erupts. Some people scream, some laugh. Some stand frozen, unable to process what they're seeing. Because even knowing it is a performance, even understanding that these are men in costumes, the sight of 30 or 40 or 100 Krampus figures charging through a medieval square is viscerally terrifying. They move with aggressive energy, lunging at spectators, swinging their birch switches, clanging their bells with deliberately chaotic rhythm. Their masks catch the firelight, horns casting twisted shadows, eyes like bottomless pits. The runners target certain people in the crowd. Young men who shout insults, tourists who get too close with their cameras, anyone who seems to be challenging them. They rush forward, bells clanging, and strike with the birch branches. Not brutally, not to cause injury, but hard enough to sting, to shock, to remind you that this is not entirely safe. Some spectators run, others stand their ground and take their beating, proving their courage. This is part of the ritual, this exchange of aggression and endurance. Children receive special treatment. The Krampus figures will single out young ones, approach them slowly, shake their chains, rattle their bells. Most children are terrified, clinging to parents, crying, begging to leave. But some, the brave or foolish ones, stare back. They refuse to cry. And in those moments, something passes between child and demon, an acknowledgement of courage, a moment of respect. The Krampus might reach out with a clawed hand and touch the child's head, not roughly, almost gently, before moving on. This is the tradition's core purpose, teaching children that fear can be faced, that monsters can be survived. The procession continues through the village, lasting hours. The runners visit every street, every square, making sure their presence is felt everywhere. As the night wears on, they become more aggressive, the alcohol and exhaustion and transformation deepening. Fights sometimes break out between different Krampus groups, territorial disputes that are quickly broken up, but which hint at the genuine aggression simmering beneath the performance. By midnight, the square has become a scene from a medieval painting of hell. Bonfires burn, smoke hangs in the cold air. Drunk spectators stagger through the crowds. The Krampus figures continue their chaotic dance, bells clanging, switches swinging, growls echoing off stone walls. The line between past and present has dissolved. For this one night, the 21st century has disappeared, and the old ways have returned. Eventually, as the night bleeds toward dawn, the energy begins to dissipate. The runners slow, then stop. They help each other remove the masks, and suddenly they are men again. Exhausted, sweating, covered in bruises, but men. They speak in normal voices, they laugh. They drink more beer and eat sausages and complain about sore muscles. The transformation reverses. But something lingers. Ask any Krampus runner about their experience, and they will tell you that for those hours inside the mask, they were something else. They felt something ancient flowing through them. They understood, viscerally, what their ancestors felt when they performed these rituals centuries ago. The costume and the darkness and the fear in the eyes of spectators combined to create an experience that was not entirely performance, not entirely human. Krampusnacht is not a quaint folk tradition. It is not harmless entertainment. It is a controlled descent into the part of human that civilized society tries to suppress. It is permission to be aggressive, to be frightening, to embody the monster. And it works because everyone involved understands the rules. The runners agree to stop short of genuine violence. The spectators agree to accept some level of fear and discomfort. The community agrees to contain the chaos within specific boundaries and specific times. But what happens when those boundaries fail? What happens when the transformation becomes too complete? When the mask refuses to come off, when the demon will not let go? That is the question we must face next. Because throughout history, there are stories of Krampusnacht celebrations that went wrong, of children who disappeared, of runners who never quite returned to being fully human, of nights when the performance became something else entirely. The bells still ring in the Alpine darkness every December 5th. The demons still walk the cobblestone streets, and if you stand in that crowd, if you let yourself feel the ancient fear rising in your chest, you will understand why this tradition has survived everything that has tried to kill it. Because some nights, we need to remember that monsters are real, and some nights, we need to become them. Picture yourself in the village archives of Innsbruck, Austria. It is a cold January morning in 1987, and you are a graduate student researching Alpine folklore. The archivist, an elderly woman with silver hair and watchful eyes, has brought you a collection of parish records from the 19th century. Most are mundane: births, deaths, marriages, the ordinary documentation of ordinary lives. But then you find something that makes your hands go cold. A notation from December 6th, 1847. The entry is brief, written in the cramped handwriting of a village priest. Klaus Hoffmann, age 7, missing since Krampusnacht. Parents report child was taken during the procession. No body recovered. The notation ends there, followed by other entries, other lives, as though this was simply another piece of administrative record-keeping. But you notice something else. In the margin, written in different ink, perhaps added years later, are 3 words in German. War ungezogen. He was naughty. This is not the only such entry. As you continue searching through records from Alpine villages spanning 2 centuries, you find dozens of similar notations. Children who vanished on December 5th or 6th. Children whose disappearances were attributed, at least in whispered conversations, to Krampus. Official explanations varied. The child ran away, fell into a river, got lost in the mountains, was taken by wolves. But in letters and diaries, in the private writings of grieving parents and horrified witnesses, a different story emerges. A story that suggests the line between performance and reality was sometimes crossed. A story that asks an uncomfortable question. What if Krampus was not always a man in a mask? The earliest documented case comes from the village of Gastein in 1792. A girl named Maria Eberharder, age 9, disappeared during the Krampusnacht celebrations. Witnesses reported seeing her in the crowd, watching the procession with other children, when suddenly one of the Krampus figures approached her specifically. Unlike the other runners who moved through the crowd randomly, this one seemed to have a purpose. It walked directly to Maria, bent down, and after a moment of stillness, picked her up and placed her in its basket. The witnesses assumed this was part of the performance. In the tradition, Krampus sometimes pretended to take children, carrying them a few feet before setting them down, giving them a fright, but no real harm. Parents often laughed at these moments, their children learning a lesson about the consequences of misbehavior. But this Krampus did not set Maria down. It continued walking, bells clanging, moving away from the main square and toward the edge of the village. By the time Maria's mother realized something was wrong and began screaming, the figure had disappeared into the darkness beyond the firelight. A search party formed immediately. Men grabbed torches and followed the tracks left by the Krampus runner in the fresh snow. The tracks led up into the mountains, following a narrow path that wound between pine trees and over frozen streams. The searchers followed for hours, climbing higher into terrain that became increasingly treacherous. Then, abruptly, the tracks stopped. Not at a cliff edge or a river. They simply ended in the middle of a clearing, as though the Krampus and the child had vanished into the air itself. Maria Eberharder was never found. No body, no clothing, no trace. The official record states she was lost in the mountains and likely died of exposure. But the villagers knew better. They knew that all the Krampus runners had been accounted for. They knew that no one recognized the figure that took Maria, that its mask was unlike any they had seen before, that its movements were wrong somehow, too fluid or too aggressive or simply too real. They knew that some years, when the winter was especially harsh and the darkness especially deep, something else joined the procession. Something that was not a man in a costume. In 1861, in the village of Garmisch, 3 children vanished on the same Krampusnacht. Johann, age 6, Frieda, age 8, Thomas, age 10. All 3 were from families that neighbors described as troubled. Johann's father was known for his violent temper. Frieda's mother was an alcoholic who neglected her children. Thomas had been caught stealing from the church collection box. The village priest had made public examples of all 3 families, denouncing them from the pulpit. suggesting that their moral failings had invited demonic attention. On the night of December 5th, during the height of the Krampus run, all 3 children disappeared from different locations in the village. No one saw them leave. No one heard them scream. They were simply there one moment and gone the next. The searches began at dawn and continued for weeks. Villagers scoured the mountains, checked every abandoned building, dragged the river. Nothing. It was as if the earth had opened and swallowed them whole. But here's what makes this case particularly disturbing. A woman named Helga Kirchner, who lived on the outskirts of Garmisch, wrote a letter to her sister in Munich describing what she claimed to witness that night. She stated that she saw a procession of Krampus figures pass by her cottage around midnight, long after the official celebrations had ended. These figures, she wrote, moved in complete silence except for the sound of bells. They carried baskets on their backs, and from those baskets, she heard crying. Children crying. She recognized one of the voices as belonging to Thomas, the boy who lived 3 houses down from her. Helga wrote that she was too terrified to open her door, too frightened to call out or try to help. She simply watched through her window as the silent procession moved past, heading up into the mountains. In her letter, she expressed profound guilt for her inaction, but also a bone-deep terror that kept her frozen. She wrote that the Krampus figures in this procession were wrong, that they moved like animals rather than men, that their shapes seemed to shift and blur in the darkness. She ended the letter with a plea: "Do not come to visit this winter. Something evil walks these mountains." Helga Kirchner died 6 months later, officially from pneumonia. The letter survived in her sister's possession and was later donated to a university archive, where it remains today, filed under folklore and superstition, rather than historical testimony. Because what else could it be? What else could explain children vanishing into the night, carried away by demons that were supposed to be men in masks? Throughout the 19th century, similar cases appear in parish records across the Alpine region. Not frequently, but consistently. Every few years, in some village, a child would vanish during Krampusnacht. The pattern was always similar. The child was from a troubled family or had a reputation for misbehavior. The disappearance occurred during or immediately after the procession. Searches found no trace. Official explanations cited natural causes or human accidents. But in private correspondence, in diary entries, in whispered conversations, people spoke of something else. They spoke of years when the demons were too convincing. Nights when the masks seemed to have no faces behind them. Processions that continued long after the performers had removed their costumes and gone home. In 1936, during the rise of the Nazi regime in Germany and Austria, there was a renewed effort to document and control folk traditions. Officials collected testimonies from village elders about Krampus customs, ostensibly to preserve Aryan cultural heritage. These interviews, stored in government archives, contain some of the most explicit references to the disappeared children. Multiple witnesses, speaking independently in different villages, describe the same phenomenon. Certain years, usually during harsh winters or times of social upheaval, the Krampus processions attracted something else. Something that walked among the runners but was not human. Something that actually took the children who were meant to be merely frightened. One testimony, from a man named Anton Fischer, who had participated in Krampus runs for over 40 years, is particularly chilling. He described an incident from 1928 when a runner appeared in their group who no one recognized. The figure wore a mask more elaborate than any Anton had seen. Horns that seemed almost translucent. Eyes that reflected light in an unnatural way. This runner moved differently, Anton stated, with a predatory grace that made the other performers uncomfortable. When the procession ended and the runners gathered to remove their masks and drink, this figure was gone. And so was a child named Stefan, age 5, who had been watching from his father's shoulders. Anton Fischer ended his testimony with a statement that the Nazi interviewers dismissed as senile rambling. Some years the veil is thin, some years the old powers remember. And when they do, Krampus is not a man in a mask. He is what we pretend he is not. Official statistics from Alpine police departments show an unusual pattern. Children reported missing during the first week of December, specifically between December 4th and 7th, occur at rates significantly higher than any other time of year. Modern authorities attribute this to increased crowds during festivals, to the chaos of celebrations, to children wandering off in the confusion. They point to the vast majority of these children being found safely, usually within hours. But not all of them. A small percentage, perhaps 1 or 2%, are never found. No bodies, no evidence, no explanation. Are these simply tragic accidents? Children who fell into ravines or rivers in the dark? Victims of opportunistic predators who used the festival chaos as cover? Almost certainly, yes. Almost certainly these disappearances have mundane explanations. But almost is not always. And in the space between almost and always, in the gap between what we can prove and what people witnessed, something else exists. A possibility we do not want to acknowledge. That some years, when conditions are right, when the performance becomes too perfect, when the collective belief reaches critical mass, the mask stops being a mask. The demon stops being a performance. And the basket fills with something other than air and tradition. Walk into any shopping mall in America during December, and you will find Santa Claus. His image is everywhere. On wrapping paper, on coffee cups, on inflatable lawn decorations that tower over suburban homes. He is jolly and safe and commercially viable. He sells products. He moves merchandise. He has been so thoroughly sanitized that we have forgotten he was ever anything else. But stand in that same mall and mention Krampus, and watch what happens. Watch how people's expressions change. Watch how they lean in, suddenly interested, hungry for something darker. Krampus has escaped the Alps. In the past 2 decades, he has spread across the globe with remarkable speed. Hollywood has made movies about him, both horror films and dark comedies. Urban Americans host Krampus parties, donning homemade costumes and drinking themed cocktails. Japanese artists draw him in anime style. He appears on t-shirts, coffee mugs, greeting cards. The demon from the frozen mountains has become a meme, a brand, a piece of commercial culture. We have done to Krampus what we do to everything. We have commodified him, sanitized him, turned him into entertainment. But something strange happens in this process of domestication. Unlike Santa Claus, who became gentler as he became more commercial, Krampus has remained disturbing. Even in his watered-down, mass-market form, even when he appears on ironic Christmas sweaters and craft beer labels, he retains something of his original power. People are not entirely comfortable with him. Parents debate whether Krampus decorations are appropriate for children. Schools ban Krampus costumes while allowing Santa. The demon resists our attempts to make him cute. Why? Why does Krampus, alone among Christmas figures, maintain his capacity to unsettle us? The answer lies in what he represents. Santa Claus embodies our fantasy of unconditional reward, the belief that goodness will be recognized and compensated. He is wish fulfillment, the parent we wished we had, the world we wish existed. Krampus embodies something we know to be true, but prefer not to acknowledge: that actions have consequences, that cruelty exists, that fear is a teacher, that punishment is sometimes necessary. He is the shadow side of morality, the stick that accompanies Santa's carrot. In 2015, when the first major Hollywood film about Krampus was released, critics noted an interesting phenomenon. Audiences responded to the horror not with pure terror, but with something like recognition. People left theaters saying the film felt right, that it captured something true about the Christmas season that the endless stream of heartwarming holiday movies ignored. That underneath the forced cheer and commercialized joy, underneath the pressure to be grateful and happy and loving, there exists frustration and disappointment and rage. Krampus gives us permission to acknowledge these darker feelings. He validates our suspicion that the perfect Christmas is a lie. This is why Krampus survives in modern culture while other folk demons have vanished into obscurity. We need him, not in the same way Alpine villagers needed him, not as a tool for literal behavioral control, but as a psychological outlet. In a world that demands we be constantly positive, constantly grateful, constantly performing happiness, Krampus offers a counter-narrative. He says that darkness is real, that fear is valid, that not everyone deserves rewards. In an age of participation, trophies and gentle parenting and trigger warnings, he represents something increasingly rare: the acknowledgement that life contains genuine consequences. But there is danger in this sanitization, in transforming a legitimate cultural tradition into a commercial product. The young Americans who host Krampus parties, who wear the masks purchased from online retailers, who post photos of themselves in demon costumes on social media, they do not understand what they are invoking. They do not know the history, the weight, the reality of what Krampus represents to the communities that created him. To them, he is a cool aesthetic, a way to be edgy and different, a rebellion against mainstream Christmas culture. They wear the mask, but they do not feel the transformation. They ring the bells, but they do not understand what those bells announce. In Austria and Bavaria, the traditional communities watch this global commercialization with mixed feelings. Some welcome it, seeing it as validation of their culture, proof that the world recognizes the value of their traditions. Tourism has brought money to villages that were once isolated and poor. Young people who might have abandoned the mountains for cities now stay because they can make a living from Krampus festivals. The tradition has been revitalized, with more participants and larger celebrations than at any point in the past century. But others worry. They worry that something essential is being lost in translation. The Krampus of TikTok videos and Halloween stores is not the Krampus who walks the December darkness of the Alps. He is not the figure that connects them to their ancestors, that embodies their relationship with a harsh landscape, that serves as a genuine psychological and cultural force. He has become a costume, a character, a brand. And in that transformation, he has lost his teeth. Except he has not entirely. Because every December 5th, in the mountains where this tradition began, the real Krampusnacht still occurs. The runners still transform. The children still scream in genuine terror. The darkness still feels deeper than it should. And occasionally, very occasionally, there are still whispers of things going wrong, of performers who became too immersed in their roles, of children who saw something that frightened them in ways that require therapy, of nights when the boundary between performance and reality seemed dangerously thin. In 2019, during the Krampusnacht celebration in the village of Linz, a runner named Michael Gruber suffered what was officially termed a psychological break. During the procession, he became increasingly aggressive, attacking spectators with genuine violence rather than the ritualized strikes that are part of the tradition. It took 6 men to restrain him and remove his mask. When they did, witnesses reported that his eyes were wrong, that he did not seem to recognize anyone, that he continued growling and snarling like an animal. He was hospitalized and eventually recovered, claiming no memory of the incident. The official explanation was alcohol poisoning combined with heat exhaustion from the heavy costume. But the other runners, the ones who had performed alongside him for years, told a different story in private. They said that Michael had gone too deep, that he had let the demon in too far, that some part of him was still lost, even after his physical recovery. This is the question that haunts us as Krampus spreads across the modern world. What are we actually invoking when we don the mask and ring the bells? Is it simply performance? Harmless theater that allows us to explore our darker impulses in a controlled environment? Or is it something more dangerous? A doorway that should remain closed? A tradition that survived for centuries precisely because it was treated with respect and fear rather than as entertainment? Consider what it means that we are drawn to Krampus in this particular moment in history. We live in an age of surveillance and safety protocols, of helicopter parenting and mandatory reporting, of a culture that bubble wraps children and adults alike against any possibility of harm or discomfort. We have tried to eliminate fear from childhood, to remove all sharp edges, to create a world where everyone is protected and no one is hurt. And we are producing a generation that is, paradoxically, more anxious and more fragile than any before it. Because we cannot eliminate darkness by pretending it does not exist. We cannot make our children strong by shielding them from all difficulty. Krampus reminds us of an older truth, that fear is a teacher, that difficulty builds character, that a childhood without any terror produces adults who cannot handle the inevitable terrors of life. The Alpine villagers who created this tradition understood something we have forgotten. They knew that children need to learn about consequences, about darkness, about the reality that the world is not always safe or fair. They knew that the kindest thing you can do for a child is prepare them for a world that will not always be kind. But here is the uncomfortable question we must ask ourselves. If we bring Krampus into our modern world, if we resurrect this tradition and spread it across cultures that do not understand its context, what are we actually creating? Are we recovering a valuable piece of wisdom about human and child rearing? Or are we playing with forces we do not comprehend, invoking darkness for entertainment without understanding the price? The Krampus of Instagram is safe. The Krampus of Hollywood is controllable. But the Krampus of the Alpine winter, the one who walks through December darkness trailing chains and carrying an empty basket, the one who remembers when he was not a performance, but a presence. That Krampus has not been tamed. He has only been sleeping. And as we spread his image across the globe, as millions of people don his mask, and ring his bells, as we collectively invoke his name and his power, we should ask ourselves what we are awakening. Because traditions survive for reasons. They endure because they serve purposes that go deeper than entertainment or cultural pride. Krampus survived Christianity's attempts to destroy him. He survived modernity's attempts to rationalize him away. He survived because he represents something true and necessary about human, something we ignore at our peril. The knowledge that darkness exists. The acceptance that fear has value. The understanding that monsters, whether real or symbolic, serve to teach us how to survive in a world that is not always safe. Stand in a shopping mall in December and look at the sanitized Christmas displays. Everything is light and joy and commercial happiness. Now close your eyes and imagine bells clanging in the darkness. Imagine chains dragging through snow. Imagine a figure with horns and hollow eyes approaching through the night. Feel the fear that rises in your chest. That ancient terror that no amount of modernity has erased. That is Krampus. Not the version on the greeting card or the beer label, but the real one, the old one, the one we have not fully tamed despite all our efforts. He is still out there. In the mountains where he was born, yes, but also spreading, adapting, finding new forms in new cultures. The beast is in the modern world now. And the question is not whether we should fear him. The question is whether we still know how to respect what he represents. Whether we understand that some doors, once opened, do not easily close. Whether we have the wisdom to invoke darkness without being consumed by it. The mask is waiting. The basket is empty. And every December 5th, somewhere in the world, the bells begin to ring. If you found value in this exploration of the darkness that walks beside Christmas, please take a moment to subscribe and let me know in the comments. Do we need Krampus in the modern world? Or have we invited something we are not prepared to handle? Sleep well tonight, and remember that the old traditions survive for reasons we may not fully understand until it is too late. Until next time, this has been a journey into the shadows that our celebrations try to hide.